So I'm joined by Sander Hicks. And how do I introduce Sander Hicks? Well, Sander is a writer, he is a filmmaker, he is a small business owner, he is a father, he is an international traveler, he is a deep thinker and political analyst. How does that describe you? Do you think that does you
Well, that's
justice?
very flattering. Thank you.
Yes. And I thought we would have a chat about some recent events that have gone on, but also about other events in general. I find Sander to be a very interesting individual. I know you're a member of the Democratic Socialists of America here in New York City. You do a lot of activism with that. You are a progressive. I know that you've been a critic of U.S. wars and U.S. foreign policy, exposing a lot of the lies behind it. So you also, from what I understand, got an interesting visit in the last week or so. Would you mind
Yeah,
telling us about that?
sure. I'd love to talk about that because it was kind of a political highlight of my career, I guess, as an activist. Also a low point too, because it's what happened is that the FBI, accompanied by an NYPD detective, came by this apartment in Sunset Park, urging me to reconsider my plans to attend the New Horizon Conference, which is a conference sponsored by certain politically active Iranians every year, usually in Iran. This year, this year is very different. There's a lot of almost like Cold War paranoia, anticipation of a hot war against Iran. The U.S. has done so many different little nasty things. The only thing they haven't done is just bombed the crap out of the 10 major cities of Iran. But it seems like in a lot of ways that's where we might be going, unfortunately, especially with people like Bolton, Pompeo, Sigal, Mandelker, and Trump in power. And Mandelker is a undersecretary of terrorism finance and has been pushing the use of sanctions against Iran and against the New Horizon Conference. So the FBI came here and said, if you go, bad things will happen.
Now, you're not the only person to have gotten visited, from what I understand. Many of the attendees of the New Horizon Conference have gotten this message.
It hadn't happened in the past, but it did happen recently, kind of a clamp down. And it's too bad because the best, some of the best minds and voices from both the American left and the American right, but independent voices. We were kind of a coalition of independent diplomats trying to prevent war and create diplomacy where there is none between two countries that have a lot of animosity between them.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say I went to a couple New Horizon conferences years back. I went to two of them, and I mean, it never seemed anything but a conference to me. I mean, there were a lot of different speakers from many different countries. I learned a lot at the New Horizon Conference, not just about Iran, not just about Israel, but also about the situation in Europe and the situation facing Poland. Some speakers from Russia, some speakers from different parts of the Middle East. I found it to be a very educational thing. And it's a huge media event in Iran. It seemed like every TV network in Iran was there. And actually, one of the New Horizon conferences that I went to, an American TV network was there. I think it was ABC or NBC News actually covered it briefly because it was focused on Black Lives Matter and the Black liberation and Black question in the United States. There were speakers from the Nation of Islam and other things. And
Professor Vernelia Randall, I believe, was at your conference too. I
Yes.
met her over a video call. Actually, we did she gave me some free legal advice.
Yeah, and she was there. Some folks from Final Call newspaper were there. Dr. Wilmer Leon, the professor of political science, who has a radio program on Sputnik Radio and also a radio program on Sirius XM, he was there, and I just found the whole thing to be quite an interesting gathering. And it's an interesting mixture of folks, I will say. I think the one I went to earlier, Wayne Madsen, who's a prolific writer and former NSA whistleblower, I believe, he was there, and it was just an interesting gathering with a lot of different viewpoints. And honestly, I feel like gatherings like that are really what started to get me thinking that the kind of the standard way of operating in the American left, wasn't really having some answers, because I went to this conference and I heard from people like Terry Mason, and I heard from people, around the Middle East and people around the world, and it seemed like they were very critical of capitalism, but not all of them had this standard Marxist approach. And it was really interesting to hear these different perspectives. I know a Shia cleric spoke about the Islamic criticism of capitalism. I found that to be fascinating. The Iranian system, they maintain that it's neither socialist or capitalist. They say it's not capitalism, but Islam. And when I asked that question to my guides, they actually had me at the New Horizon conference ask that question from the floor, which I thought was really cool. That was a really great experience to engage. Yeah. Medea Benjamin was at the first conference I went to, along with Gareth Porter, the progressive writer who'd written about the Iran.
Who later recanted going to the conference.
Sure.
There was too many 9/11 truth people there for his taste.
Sure, but in Iran, 9/11 truth is majority opinion. And I think in a lot of the world, the opinions that are considered to be 9/11 truth are actually majority opinion. When I was in South America, it seemed like I didn't meet anybody who thought that the official story of 9/11 was totally true. When I was in the Middle East, when I was in Africa, what's labeled 9/11 truth and tinfoil hat, and if you believe that, you deserve to be silenced and ostracized and isolated, in American media seems pretty mainstream in my experience. If you get out of Western Europe, you get out of the United States. I mean, is that your experience?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. There's actually global polls too. I think in 2007 or 8, there was a lot of polling done, but there was a global poll that was really jarring. There's activism. There's the Truth Action Project, which is a nationwide group, and there's the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, which I think is probably the most. It's probably going to go down in history as the most important form of activism. The Lawyers Committee is making progress with U.S. Southern District Court. There may be a grand jury getting convened or being convened right now around the scientific evidence that was presented in a petition for a grand jury from the Lawyers Committee with 56 categories of evidence saying the way the buildings imploded, melted steel, the way the buildings exploded doesn't make any sense, and there's got to be another reason, which gets back to your other question of like, why do many people in Europe, South America, Iran think that the 9/11 official story, the American official story, couldn't possibly be true? First of all, it came from Bush and Cheney, so their credibility internationally was pretty darn low.
Can you explain this legal proceeding? Like, is someone being sued or?
Yeah. So okay. So it is a petition for a grand jury submitted to U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Berman, who is the head prosecutor at the United States Federal Court, Southern District, which covers Lower Manhattan. And there's a terrorism division head inside of his office who has been in contact now with Mick Harrison and David Meiswinkle and other members of the board of directors of this new NGO. It's a U.S. nonprofit called the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. It's a nationwide group. We're talking about lawyers in California, New York City, Texas, and other states, New Jersey. And they are judicious. They are cautious. They are scientific, and their arguments are devastating. And their rhetoric and their language is precise and compelling. Mm-hmm. And that's the whole point. I've learned some legal terms, like the evidence they say is dispositive, not merely persuasive. So that means it's positively, scientifically irrefutable. The evidence is dispositive, not merely persuasive. And they present their argument, and then they present 56 categories of evidence saying that Building 7, the way that Building 7 came down without being hit by a plane, the way that the NIST report cover-up failed to explain, failed to even investigate for explosives. So now a lot of 9/11 people get really focused on that part of the argument, the architects and engineers for 9/11 truth stuff. But there's another way to go about it too. I've actually been really enjoying some podcasts. My new friends, Richard Cox and Adam Fitzgerald, have been pointing me towards other podcasts. And my specialty has always been to look at the intelligence connections of the deep state, U.S., Israeli, Saudi intelligence to the 19 hijackers, specifically Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. In fact, when the FBI was at my front door, I tied some of this in. I said, I have spoken to FBI agents before, and it was me going after you guys, not you guys coming after me. So it's a very interesting way to go about 9/11. You can either look at the way the buildings fell, was it a part of a spectacle, right? Society of the spectacle. We're all mesmerized by a trauma, a tragedy, and we think we know the story, right? And so we think we know the emotional part of the story, but we don't look at the politics, class struggle, imperialism, triumph, the triumph of false religion over the truth. That's the real story about 9/11. And
yeah, I could never understand how. I mean, I was young at the time. I was a junior high school student, but even I could tell that Osama bin Laden was a fanatical Saudi Islamic fundamentalist, Wahhabi, and Saddam Hussein was a Ba'athist Arab socialist, Arab nationalist.
Right.
So how in the world did they have the U.S. public convinced that Saddam Hussein was somehow in on 9/11? I mean, even their own evidence wasn't very convincing. I think it was that somebody had gone to the hospital once in Iraq or something. It was pretty ridiculous. But the attitude in the area that I grew up in Ohio was just kind of, well, they're all in that part of the world. They're all the same. They're all the same. They all hate America. They all hate our freedom. That was just kind of the attitude, and no one seemed to think. And now, especially with people being able to pull out their phones and just look up this stuff, it should be blatantly obvious that the notion that invading Iraq over 9/11 somehow made any sense was pretty ridiculous. I mean, it was pretty absurd.
Also, the ability to travel to the Middle East, especially when somebody else pays for it, is a great experience. It's even more powerful than whipping out your phone and looking up some facts or history. And reading books is also great, but even more powerful is the experience of traveling there. So again, it's almost like they don't want us to open our eyes. Travel is really kind of like a red pill.
Well, yes, and this notion that people shouldn't be able to travel to a conference simply because of some printout, some indictment that they have about some, Hollywood spy story. It sounds pretty fantastical to me. I've looked over what they've alleged, and it sounds like something that a Hollywood screenwriter thought up, not something that actually happened. But that's just my first impression. I know nothing about it. But even if that indictment is true, why should a journalist, an activist, a filmmaker like yourself not be free to get on a plane and go to a conference, and report on what happens there and come back and tell people what you saw? I mean, isn't this just basic freedom of association, freedom to travel? I mean, it appears to me like this is an attack on people's civil liberties to try and scare people out of going to this conference, to threaten prosecution on people for simply going to a conference in another country.
Yeah, and the context is that there's been provocations or false flag incidents in the Persian Gulf, the Gulf of Oman this year. As you know, YouTube has shut down Press TV's ability to post new videos, and I know you're very aware of what happened with the incarceration of a Press TV journalist, Marzia Hashemi. It turns out when the New York Times said she was incarcerated for 10 days without charges because she was a material witness in a grand jury investigation, they were right. The grand jury investigation was leading to the indictment of Monica Witt. So Monica Witt was indicted by a grand jury. And Monica Witt, you're right, Monica Witt's story is very impressive.
Well, you had often expressed an interest in one topic that we've often discussed is the connection between faith and socialism, and how in a lot of left circles that's kind of almost considered to be a what do you call it, a topic that people try to avoid, I guess you could say, right?
Not in the DSA. The DSA actually admits that there is a tradition in a lot of religions that socialism has actually grown out of the tradition of communitarianism. Look at primitive Christianity and look at what Luke reports in Acts of Apostles, that people were living communally with all things in common. And look how Marx was influenced by that. When Marx said to each according to his needs, from each according to his ability. It was really a paraphrase of Luke in Acts of Apostles about how everybody lived communally and they pooled their money together, and nobody had any need, nobody had any wants, because everybody got whatever they wanted. I've been trying to I've been active kind of all over the place in the DSA, active a little bit in anti-war group, and there's working groups, so active a bit in affordable housing, and getting a little bit more active now in electoral, and trying to get people excited about nominating somebody, probably Pete Harrison in the 12th Congressional District, a district I know pretty well. So, but back to, so I almost have no room on my plate for another activity inside the DSA, but I'm very interested in a lot of other things inside the DSA, like the Religious Socialism Working Group. There is a Religious Socialism Working Group. And did you know, Michael Harrington's the founder, but there's also Rabbi Michael Lerner was around in the early days of DSA, and then he kind of split off a little bit, formed the Tikkun magazine, and that moved the society, what is it, like the Network of Spiritual Progressives was his network. I don't know if he's really using that moniker so much, because I'm a member of that network, but I haven't heard from him or using that name.
Let me ask you, what is the crew? I know DSA has been really heavily recruiting in the last 2-3 years, and that it seems to me that there's a layer of younger people, millennials, even generations.
No, I'm an old man inside the DSA. I'm like 48. I talk to if I see
what
somebody,
they like. What are the new DSA members like?
They're really smart and a little bit cynical, and I haven't met anybody who's actually really interested in religious socialism or the nexus, the Venn diagram between the two, between revolutionary consciousness and compassion. And
what motivates them to join the DSA?
Oh gosh, this is a good question. I think I do actually have some answers, because I'm always. All right, let me just be totally honest with you. I feel self-conscious. I was purged out of the ISO in the 90s, and so I've had this psychological block. Like, if I don't behave inside the DSA, I'll get purged, right? And so I've been paranoid for the whole past year. If I fuck up, if I wear the wrong thing, because I would go to DSA paper sales in the late 90s outside the UPS hub on 4th Street. And I'd be wearing a white leather jacket with fringe on the arms. I'd ride up on my motorcycle wearing a bright red stocking cap. And I was later chastised for wearing the wrong thing, and it's like.
You're referring to the, just so our viewers know, the International Socialist Organization, the ISO.
Right, which I was sad to hear dissolved recently, because I always thought they would be around to complain about.
Right. And you were telling me that they didn't like you selling a newspaper in the wrong clothes, I guess.
Yeah, they didn't like a lot about my personality. And in my 20s, in the 90s, I was even more vivacious and exuberant, and just didn't give a fuck about conformity and groupthink. And I was like, wow, this is really groupthink. The way they just kind of and I learned, the old Soviet term apparatchik, the person who's not good at anything except ascending hierarchies. And I was like, wow, that young lady over there seems to really just be doing nothing but kissing ass and just ascending up the authoritarian hierarchy, and she's an apparatchik, at least in my mind. And so,
well, my critique of the ISO was it always seemed like there was never a color revolution around the world that they didn't support, and there was never a genuine anti-imperialist force in the world that they could bring themselves to support. It just seemed like, as somebody who's critical of American media and U.S. foreign policy, they were on the wrong side no matter where it was. If U.S. media called somebody an evil dictator, they thought they were an evil dictator. If U.S. media was cheering for some protest movement that was clearly, being orchestrated by the CIA or U.S. intelligence services, they were cheering for it as well. And that was always my critique of not just ISO, but the international. What is it? The International Socialist Tendency, the IST.
Yeah, the IS, yeah.
Yeah, people used to refer to that as the imperialism supporting tendency, because it just seemed that it was on the wrong side of every conflict. I know for a while they were supporting Hugo Chavez, but now they've decided not to support Venezuela. But They were briefly, I guess, supporting Venezuela, but other than that, I can't really think of any exceptions. They were just very much, and that comes out of the history with Max Shachtman and Tony Cliff and all of that. And it was a wing of what they talk about third camp Trotskyism that really became a wing of more new left and academia. I always saw the ISO as more of an academic kind of group.
I've never seen such a high degree of developed class consciousness as I saw in the ISO in the 90s. And some of the international stuff, imperialism supporting organization, I never saw that. And I'm pretty good at foreign policy. Of course, I wasn't following the ISO in the aughts or the teen decade before they imploded last spring. But in the 90s, I learned a lot, and I was actually really sad when I got kicked out. So I want to respond to you saying that you think the DSA is recruiting a lot, because the DSA is so unlike the ISO. The ISO would always try to recruit people, especially people that were minorities and people that were in unions or in UPS, the Teamster union, so the DSA doesn't recruit and the DSA doesn't purge people. That's one thing I've learned this past year. And I think a lot of my paranoia is just based on the past.
Like
and
you have to ask to join of your own free will. No one can recruit you, I guess. Is that what you're saying? Or
yeah, I mean, I joined out of my own free will because I was really excited about AOC winning for Congress. I'm excited about Bernie, excited about the possibilities of really having a political home, a political base. Running for Congress taught me a lot, taught me that I needed more of a network. And so a little voice inside my head was like, are you just joining the DSA because you want to maybe run for Congress again? And then I was just kind of like, well, maybe, but I'm going to try this out. And I'm socialist enough, especially being an ex-ISO guy. And now I'm not running for Congress, but I am in the DSA. And I just love the political issues that we tackle. I love the fact that they care about people. They give free pizza at their meetings.
Well, I know in Queens, New York, there was just a DSA member who it appeared that she won as district attorney, and then all of a sudden the Democratic Party challenged a bunch of the ballots or something, and now she's not going to be district attorney. What happened with that?
Yeah, Tiffany Caban was a new friend of mine, and I was active in her campaign. I canvassed for her. But yeah, it was the absentee ballots. The absentee ballots tend to be more conservative people that were going for the establishment candidate. I haven't even had the suspicion that there's something. I probably should. I don't have all the time in the world, but I haven't really suspected the Queen's Board of Elections of malfeasance. Is there any evidence of that?
Well, I'm asking you. I know there were a lot of contested votes. I guess that was the issue, is that there were certain ballots that were not counted, and that was the issue. But I haven't.
Oh, I see. Well, Tiffany did take it to court, and she had good attorneys. And
you mentioned earlier about the Teamsters in the 1990s and Teamsters for a Democratic Union. And if I remember correctly, it was Ron Carey, who was a leader of the Teamsters, who led this UPS strike in the 1990s, right? And then after he led this successful strike, the Clinton presidency went after him and got him purged from the Teamsters. And there's a whole ugly history of that, of the Democratic Party leadership kind of going after, progressive labor leaders who kind of shake up, and stir things up. And that, the AOC rivalry with Nancy Pelosi, and what went on in Queens, which was, I guess, Caban versus the Democratic Party establishment. You can go back to Abscam, right? In the 1970s, the FBI had some guy dressed up like he was a sheik from the Middle East, and he went around and they tried to entrap a lot of labor and progressive-oriented Democrats who were tied to labor unions for taking bribes. This Democratic Party that is more oriented toward social liberalism and is kind of hostile toward labor unions and economic liberalism, and doesn't really like the Bernie Sanders style rhetoric. The labor unions are key. I mean, they give lots of money to the Democrats. They turn out their members to volunteer. I mean, if it weren't for labor, the Democrats would be a lot weaker. But yet it seems like the Democrats don't turn around and help labor at the end of the day, right? I mean, the Employee Free Choice Act, Obama said he was for it. He got elected. All of a sudden, he forgot all about it. What? The Employee Free Choice Act? He heard nothing about it. When Wisconsin, when they were occupying the state capitol, Obama didn't go there. He didn't support the protesters, and it seems like the the wing of the Democratic Party that's more interested in, free trade and environmental policies, and maybe they're pushing feminism and the right to contraception, but when it comes to the right of people to make a decent wage, they just don't want to talk about it. I mean, they aren't interested, right? It's a weird trend I see.
Not in the Democratic Party that I'm building, because I'm in the DSA, and we are the kind of leftists who understand socialism and understand Marx, but also understand working in I think it's a form of revolutionary nonviolence to believe in elections, even though elections are often stolen. Still, sometimes you can win, like AOC, like State Senator Julia Salazar, another campaign I worked on a little bit this year, and Caban, campaign I worked on a little bit more. And Bernie, we endorsed Bernie like way back last winter. The DSA got out really early with that. So the DSA's got teams on the streets working for Bernie every weekend. We do canvassing door to door, and that's the thing that's really kick-ass about the DSA is that when they endorse a candidate, they really put boots on the ground. Mm-hmm. They get people knocking on doors, because you have these armies of volunteers using new technology and able to record. This person says yes. This person is a 5. They're enthusiastic yes. This person is a 3. Maybe do some follow-up. They're on the fence. This person is a no. F you, don't come here again. They're very hostile and potentially violent. I mean, I almost got my ass kicked walking through buildings in Ridgewood. This guy was like, upset that I was in the hallway. So
it used to be what the Communist Party used to do in the day, right? They used to say you'd get a knock on your door if you lived in certain neighborhoods in New York City every day with someone trying to sell you the Daily Worker. And, I get knocks on my door in my apartment building from, Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons. But I don't think I've ever had a communist knock on my door. The only place that anyone's ever tried to sell me a communist newspaper is at a demonstration or a protest, and most people in the United States aren't really there. So I guess the fact that DSA is going door to door in Queens and going even to places where people may not be receptive, I mean, that seems like they're penetrating America more than these leftists that kind of hang around the protest cage and compare who's the most revolutionary and who's a sellout, and and who is true to the one true line of Lenin. I mean, that seems like DSA is actually making an effort to try and impact the broader country, not just an isolated left milieu.
It's true. And and to respond even again to your questions about how the Democratic Party as a whole really is in crisis. When you look at the candidates that the party has nominated for president, they tend to be very watered down, middle of the road, people that don't inspire the working class, the voters, the masses. But I'm really inspired today by this guy, Pete Harrison. I was really hoping he would declare sometime this summer, and he said he would do it in July, but now in late August, he declared. So as you might remember, I ran last year to try to get on the ballot to be in the primary. At the same time, the AOC was running in the 14th congressional district. I was running in the 12th to challenge Carolyn Maloney, who is a longstanding incumbent centrist Democrat, very, very conservative on Middle East politics, but is beloved at home by some mostly baby boomer feminists. So there's that. I personally find her vote for the Iraq war to be pretty abhorrent, and her personal fortune of $28 million she's amassed through inaction in the last 26 years of being in office, I think speaks volumes. So I've been waiting for a good candidate to come to rise. I'm not running again this year, but this guy Pete Harrison is great because he's talking about the working class. He's talking about affordable housing, his experiences in affordable housing, getting arrested, doing activism, being an adjunct faculty member at CUNY, and how his lens is affordable housing and how the environmental issues weave into this lens. When we talk about affordable housing, they've got to be zero carbon, or they've got to be low carbon, or they've got to So all of his other political issues are kind of weaving through this one issue. And that's a very compelling issue. I know this from canvassing and getting signatures on the street. Affordable housing is an issue that you can win on. And Maloney hasn't done jack. She scolded us for standing up to Amazon, the corporate military industrial contractor Amazon. Not just books. They're not just a bookstore anymore. They're cloud services for DoD and Pentagon, and they help ICE do facial recognition, and that's who Maloney wanted, to come into our city. So I'm really excited about Pete Harrison. I'm excited about being active at the grassroots in the DSA.
Okay, great. Well, I think I covered a rally maybe a year or two ago, and it was some DSA folks. They were protesting Amazon, I think. And I believe the chant was, what is it? The rent is too high, the wages are too low, capitalism has got to go. I thought that was pretty clever, The
rent is too high, the
what?
wages are too low, capitalism has got to go. Yeah, it's the rhythm. The rhythm is funky. I think you need an extra syllable in or out somewhere.
Well, there you go. But it seemed like that seems to be the sentiment, and a lot of people in New York City would agree with that, I think. When it comes to economic issues, people realize they're being ripped off. So there you go. Well, it's been interesting to talk to you. It's certainly been a wide-ranging conversation. So thank you very much, Sander. I'm glad you could give us this update. And I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Caleb, I'm going to say a special prayer for you. You have a big heart for revolution, and I just want you to realize that the spirit of history is with you. The spirit of truth is with you, and just expand your heart and let your heart lead the way, because there's a huge amount of light inside you that the world really needs.
Well, thank you, Sander.